uh, regarding mountain lion activity, particularly a perceived increase in interactions between mountain lions and domestic pets and livestock. We have today panelists from the Felidae Conservation Fund Bay Area Puma Project. That's Alice Granados and Zara McDonald. From Mid-Peninsula Regional Open Space District, we have Matt Sharp-Cheney. From University of California Cooperative Extension, Agriculture and Natural Resources, Carolyn Whitesell. From Panthera, we have Veronica, I'm going to say this wrong, Jovovich. Did I do that? Okay, good. And from the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, we have Garrett Allen and Gabrielle Stafford. So the way this is going to work is that first we're going to go through presentations. Each organization is going to introduce themselves and their mission and give some information about mountain lions and, as appropriate, discuss their research. And I have the community's provided me with over 60 questions, which was shared with all the panelists before this presentation. And so hopefully a lot of those questions will get answered within the presentations. And then after that, we're going to go through maybe questions that didn't get covered. There's also an opportunity to, if you look at the bottom of your screen, there's two little thought bubbles that say Q&A under them. That's where questions can be submitted. I suggest that you wait until you hear most of the presentations before you submit your questions, because you might hear the answer, and that way we won't have as many to sort through. But so after we get started with the presentations, we're going to start with Alice Granados from the Felidae Conservation Fund Bay Area Puma Project. And you want to go ahead and share your screen, Alice, and start your presentation. Thank you.
Thanks everyone for your time and for your interest in this topic. My name is Alice Granados, and I'm here with Zara McDonald from the Felidae Conservation Fund. And yeah, we're happy to be talking to you guys today, and we're just going to talk about mountain lions. So just a little bit about the organization, though, in case you haven't heard of us as an organization. We're a nonprofit that was started in 2006 with a local and a global focus as well. All the stuff I'm going to be telling you about today is related to the Bay Area Puma Project, which is a project within Felidae. And the overall kind of mission of Felidae is to strengthen conservancy of native felid populations locally, globally, and we use research, education, technology, and community work to do that. The Bay Area Puma Project was the first long-term research and conservation initiative on pumas in the San Francisco Bay Area. Currently, our priorities include measuring, modeling the effects of habitat fragmentation on wildlife. We do this by measuring puma occupancy, looking at their health. We do fragmentation analyses. We're looking at how these animals adapt to the urban edge. And we're also looking at how human activities overall influence puma persistence in the Bay Area. I'm going to talk a little bit about mountain lion natural history. So you might hear me calling them pumas, mountain lions. It's the same thing. They're also known as cougars, but again, all the same species. Mountain lions live 6 to 13 years in the wild. They're native to the Americas. So this map here just shows their range. So they exist all the way from northern Canada down to the southern tip of South America. They have the largest range of any land mammal except for humans. They are low density, which low density means you just don't have too many individuals that can exist within a given area. But they are wide ranging. Overall, the population is decreasing. So within this whole area from Canada to South America. And that is something that was, that assessment comes from the World Conservation Union, which is the body that decides the level of endangered status for species, whether it's birds, mammals, frogs, all the species that have been named. Mountain lions are territorial. They are programmed to disperse. They are crepuscular, which means they are active from dawn, at dawn and at dusk mostly. But in urban areas, that might shift a little bit because they have to be like more vigilant. Humans are more of a threat there. So usually in more kind of wild situations, they might bed down during the day, but their activity patterns might shift a little bit in urban areas. Mountain lions are solitary unless it's a mother with cubs. Cubs stay with a mom for approximately 2 years. There's some cubs in the video there. Or if you see a pair together, it's a male and female traveling together, and they'll travel together for like 2 to 3 days before they mate. So that's why they're together. Then after mating, if the female becomes pregnant, the gestation period or the pregnancy period is about 90 days. The mom can leave cubs alone for up to 3 days. When she goes to hunt, she'll put them in a place where she thinks is safe for them, and then she'll go and come back after. The females will either be pregnant or with young for about 70% of their lifetime. And again, like I said before, these guys are low density, they're large carnivores, and so they need a lot of space. And so there might only be one every 50 to 100 square miles. Lions are obligate carnivores, which means they need meat to survive. The preferred meal in the Bay Area is mule deer. They will ambush prey, so they'll stalk, sprint, and then ambush from behind. But they are opportunistic, and so they will eat almost anything that falls with, that is a mouse, up to the size of a moose. So obviously now no moose in the Bay Area, but in areas of Canada, they do eat moose. But again, pets could fall into that, that range of mice up to moose. So if they're not protected, they might go after pets as well, as people know. They will also eat bobcats, coyotes, raccoons. They do also eat turkeys and feral pigs, but that's not their preferred prey. And so that was what you saw in the video. So after they make a kill, they will drag it to a more secluded spot to feed. They will cache their kill. So that's what's being done in this video that you're seeing. And they do that to keep their kill fresh. They do it to hide it from other predators, and they will be coming back over a few days to be eating on that kill. So if you see a lion that's kind of hanging around for a few days in the same area, it's probably because they're hanging around their kill. Or it might be a mom with cubs, which is more rare, but in those situations, it's usually temporary. They'll usually move on to another area. They don't like to hang around these kind of urban areas. So why are mountain lions important? Why are any of us kind of here today? So their presence can affect co-occurring species as well as their prey. So they are ecologically important. And so what that means is, as predators, they eat deer. So that could affect the deer abundance. In turn, that could indirectly affect vegetation, because if you're affecting the deer abundance, then that could affect what the deer are eating. Similarly with mesocarnivores, they could affect those species. So mesocarnivores, meso means middle, so they are just kind of mid-bodied or mid-sized bodied carnivores. So that's things like coyotes and bobcat. So they do eat those animals, but their presence can also affect the habitat and behavior of coyotes and bobcats. They're good umbrella species. And so what that means is, because, like I said before, that they use so much space, or they need so much space to live, if you protect mountain lion habitat, then by default, you're protecting like everything else that also uses that area. So that's why people use them for conservation of flagship species. They're important for healthy ecosystems. So like I said, keeping prey in check. They will kill weakened or diseased prey. They'll eat, a bunch of other species, from, like I said, the size of mouse up to moose. When they eat herbivores, they can also help spread the seeds that the herbivores eat, and that is good for forest regeneration and regrowth. This is just to show some research that we've done. So this is Felidae related research that's been done in the past couple of years that has been looking at like urban edge. And so the papers these are the titles of the papers, but if you want to read them, we're happy to send them to you, so you can just let us know. I'm going to talk about what the takeaways of these papers were. So one study was looking at the effects of land use change and prey abundance on body condition of lions. And so of course this was done in the Bay Area. And the takeaway from this study was that puma body condition was best in moderately developed habitats. So that means areas like parks, residential areas that did not have like a high density of residents living in that area. Golf courses, things like that, compared to highly urbanized areas, so areas where there's a lot of people living. So their body condition was good in moderately developed habitat, but the issue was human tolerance. There was another paper I'm going to mention that was looking at puma occupancy and what the importance of prey availability versus cover was, and what was found in this study was that pumas were selecting areas with more cover versus prey. So that just highlights that even if you have enough food for them in an area, they need that cover because it helps them with like stalking and their strategy to find deer. And so forest structure, good areas with good cover, that is super important for these animals. And then a study that's that is in review right now by other experts in the field is a fragmentation analysis. And so with this study, what was found was that small patches are super important. So even though we said that pumas need a lot of space, small patches are really important because it helps them move between those larger spaces as well. So if you see in this cartoon, the patches that are bigger, like we might think of building a corridor or having some sort of corridor between those two. But on the left, we have these small kind of stepping stones, and that's where those small patches come in as being super important. And so connectivity is really important for wildlife, not just mountain lions between these areas, but there could be a threshold at which a patch becomes too small to even be important as a stepping stone. I'm just going to talk a little bit about some of the work we've done looking at puma population health. So starting last year, we started a study collecting scat, which is puma poop, so fecal samples. And from that, we can measure the prevalence of their exposure to rodenticides and parasites. So rodenticides are obviously used for pest control, and they were banned in 2020 in California, but their use is still, they still are in existence in some places, like the supplies are still there. And so why are we looking at rodenticides? Because it can weaken the immune system of these animals. And we have seen in bobcats, coyotes, and mountain lions that had mange that they did come out as testing positive for rodenticide exposure. So we want to get a sense of what level that's at in other places in the Bay Area. We can also measure stress from their scat. We can look at what they're eating, and we can also get information about their genetics. So, okay, so yeah, this other study that we started last year was looking at puma population health. And so this is just the study area where we were working in San Mateo County. We did this also in Marin, but I'm just showing the map from San Mateo here. And so these red squiggly lines in this map are all places where we were searching for scat. And it wasn't just kind of us looking for the scat. We worked with Working Dogs for Conservation. So they have specially trained dogs that came down, and they have been trained to locate the scat. And so we found, and these dots that are shown are all the places where we located the scat with the dogs. And this is a start of a long-term study that the second survey is planned for July. And so we'll be able to look at like long-term trends and temporal trends in not just where the scat was found, but all these things that I mentioned in the previous slide and the different concentrations of that. We're also looking to test for toxoplasmosis, which is a parasite. Wildlife near urban areas are more vulnerable because it's found within feral cats as the main vector. So they might also contaminate through their feces, the soil or the water could become contaminated, and that could infect other species as well. And the reason why this is of interest to us, besides it just being something prevalent in urban areas, is because it could change animal behavior and could potentially make pet predation more likely. So we want to get a sense of, again, what the degree of exposure is amongst pumas to this. Okay, so talk a little bit about research, but what's also important is sharing this work as it can help us inform our community work. And so we can, with all our findings that we get from like all this camera trap data, it helps us target our outreach efforts. So we can ask questions like, where is someone more likely to encounter a lion? Maybe where are the areas that we don't have lions anymore? And that's super important because it can tell us about the implications for human wildlife conflict. And we can also use that to kind of put in perspective the level of risk in different areas in the Bay. And so this kind of takes us to the work that we did in La Honda in 2018 and 2019. And the motivation behind this whole project was that community members were concerned about there being too many lions, and they requested that Felidae come and inventory wildlife in the area. And so the goal was to deploy a camera trap grid. So cameras tell us where animals are and when, because each image has a timestamp and it's related to a specific latitude, longitude, location. And so we trained community participants on data collection and management. And then at future meetings, so there's multiple meetings during the study period, we would share those findings and the progress. And then we would also address misconceptions and just convey information about puma densities. And so we established this research grid using Felidae cameras, then also cameras that community participants had. And they shared those data with us and let us incorporate that into this study. And the La Honda citizen scientists were the ones maintaining all this data collection throughout the whole time. And I'm just going to share some of the findings, and just to note that we have a full report. So of based on the results of this study. So if anybody wants it, definitely let us know, and we're happy to share like all of that, and you can read all the details of that. This is just the highlights, just because we're trying to keep this relatively short. But this graph here shows some of our findings. So on the vertical axis, we have the detections per month from the camera traps of all these different species. On the horizontal axis, we have each different monthly period. So from the start of the study, July 2018 to June 2019. And so each color is a different species. And so what we found was that mountain lions were among the least detected species. You can see humans were detected far more. We found spatial and temporal avoidance of humans by mountain lions. So that means that mountain lions were less likely to be in areas where people were. And the temporal avoidance means that they were less likely to be active at the same times that people were most active. We found no evidence of increasing lion density. Also, we detected some family groups, which that helped people see that there weren't these packs of pumas, like I mentioned earlier. It was just a family group that was hanging out there. There was a decrease in fear by the end of the study, and some shift in perspectives. And people at the time said to us that they were surprised at how few mountain lions there were, and they realized that some of the multiple sightings were usually the same animal. There was also most activity in Crystal Springs and San Andreas reservoirs. There was also no evidence found that any of these species were locally threatened in La Honda. So that, for example, that includes raccoons, coyotes. Coyotes are probably avoiding areas used by mountain lions, and that's something related to a concept called landscape of fear, because mountain lions are predators of coyotes. And so that can change how coyotes move across the landscape to try and avoid that predator. We also know, however, though, for both of these species, getting hit by a car is a real danger. And coyotes have been shown in other studies that they can at times be shy and avoid camera traps as well. And our study, again, was done using camera traps. And it's important to note that fewer sightings of these animals does not necessarily mean reduced abundance. I'm going to just talk a little bit about habitat isolation and fragmentation. So we know everywhere this is a problem, that habitat is becoming increasingly isolated. This map is showing the Bay Area. And so what the takeaways from this map is that those red patches that you can see they're smaller and there's a lot more of them. Those are areas where there's a high degree of isolation. So that would mean that it's harder for animals to get between these areas. Where if you compare with the darker green patches, you can see they're bigger in size, they're more connected. So it's easier for animals to be moving across these areas. And so this is because more and more people and wildlife are being forced to share space. And so that could lead to human and wildlife conflict. But it also highlights the need for corridors to facilitate movement. And so what we want is that, you know, in a lot of these places, especially where there's more isolation and animals might be moving through these urban areas, we want to make sure that we don't attract them to our properties. And so that includes things like not having plants in areas that might attract deer, because of course, mountain lions will follow deer. And then just to note that within California, there are different like local mountain lion populations. And so the one that is called the Central Coast population that includes lions in San Mateo County, as well as Santa Cruz County, those ones are thought to be approaching extinction vortex because there has been inbreeding detected there. And so this is related to a potential change in status. So in 2020, there was a petition launched by a few organizations to list mountain lions under the under the California Endangered Species Act as an endangered status. So they would be like an upgrade in status. And so again, this would be specifically for the Central Coast population, San Mateo County, Santa Cruz County. And the decision for that is pending. So we have to see if that is actually going to happen or not. And then as habitat gets more and more isolated, we get more reports of mountain lion sightings. This is in part attributed to just the huge increase in the use of home security cameras, which has gone up a lot, like even compared with like 5 or 10 years ago. So Ring cameras, Nest cameras. And so this increases just local awareness about what is going on in our neighborhoods, whether it's wildlife or not. So it's cool because it can tell us about the behavior of these animals at the urban edge. However, again, it can contribute to the perception that there are more lions. And so just in this video at the top, you saw the mountain lion kind of walking across the chicken coop, but he's or she is unsuccessful because they're pretty well enclosed in the sturdy enclosure. And so luckily all the chickens survived. In the video at the bottom, the point of this video is just kind of to show like how they are a little like shy and elusive in these areas. And when it went across the street to that other house, just to point out that that house was connected to open space. So it was leaving the residential area. Okay, and then also just a little bit more about increasing perceptions of puma population size. A lot of this is also related to people, like all of us, we're using areas that we didn't used to use before. So we're taking up more space, human expansion, it's happening everywhere. And so that leads to less quality wildlife habitat. So there's fewer places for animals to go. And so again, that could also attribute to more sightings. We're just more aware and we're in new places. So that could be why we're perceiving that there's more animals around, but it's more sightings. Just to mention a couple studies that were done in the past few years. So there was a 2015 study done by Winston Vickers, a researcher, and he did a study in SoCal. And they were studying over 13 years collared mountain lions, and they found pretty low survivorship of those animals, mostly due to all like human-related mortalities, especially though with respect, those mortalities were related to vehicle collisions. And then a more recent study by researchers in the University of California, UCLA, they were looking at the small population sizes, and they noticed that there was inbreeding detected in this population in SoCal. And that was because they found like tail kinks and abnormal sperm amongst male. And so those were signs of inbreeding. And again, if you want to read any of these specific papers, like we know some of these might be behind like paywalls or whatever, but if you want to read them, anything here, just let us know and we're happy to send that to you. If you see a lion or a bobcat, you can report it to our sightings map. This is something that was started in 2012 and it's public, it's accessible, anyone can go look at it. The sightings are verified if you have a video or a photo. And the reason why we started this was it really helps complement our Bay Area wide camera trap network. So we have over 100 cameras deployed in the Bay, but also if people see mountain lions in other places, then that's awesome too, because it gives us a better idea of kind of the overall picture. And it also helps target outreach efforts. And the URL is there at the bottom as well, but if you didn't get it, again, just let us know and we can send that to you too. We also share our findings with the public. So the La Honda study that I mentioned before was one of the ways that we work with people. We also use citizens to help us collect data in other places, and we respond to individual concerns and communities. We give regular presentations to the public. We gave one earlier this week in Marin, and we also participate in events like Earth Day events. There's gonna be Field Day volunteers in these answering people's questions. We have a K-12 program called Cat Aware, and we also use technology to make interactive outreach tools like a predator prey simulator, Puma Wild Game, which you can also see on our website. And so these are the URLs for our website. If you want more information, please take a look. You can also contact myself or Zara, the emails are there. And just to note that on our website, we have a ton of resources and materials that touch on other things that we didn't specifically mention, like living and recreating in mountain lion country safely.
We have a couple questions. I was thinking it might be good to answer a couple of these questions because they're directly related to your presentation, Alice. Does anybody have an objection to that? I know we want to keep moving because we have a lot to cover, but someone asked, has the Bay Area Puma Project ever heard of habitat holding capacity?
I have not heard that term, but it seems like I would think it's the same as like carrying capacity. So then maximum amount of like animals that a particular area can withstand, but I guess I don't know what the rest of the question is asking.
Yeah. Okay. So I think that as the questions pop up, I think if somebody who's not, it's hard for somebody who's presenting to answer questions at the same time. So maybe folks who aren't presenting can answer questions as they populate.
I think those other questions will be answered in other presentations as well. So we should probably carry on.
Okay.
And those will be answered.
Move forward. Okay, great. Thank you, Alice, for your presentation. Our next up is Matt Sharp Cheney of Mid-Peninsula Regional Open Space District. is going to talk about what's going on at MidPenn.
All right. Thanks, Alice. That was a great presentation. It makes things a lot easier for me. People have that background, and huge thanks to Heather for putting this whole thing together. Really cool to see that there's 123 people participating, and very happy to be here. My name is Matt Sharp Cheney. I work with Mid-Peninsula Regional Open Space District. I'm in the Natural Resources Department, and I'm one of the wildlife biologists and the lead mammologist for the district. So that means I mostly work with bats, rats, and cats, usually what I tell people. And happy to be here today to talk about the work that we do with mountain lions. So a little background on what MidPenn is. There's also Peninsula Open Space Trust, which is a different entity. Sometimes those two get mixed up, but MidPenn Open Space, we're a public agency that was founded in 1972, and our mission is to acquire a regional greenbelt of open space land in perpetuity to protect and restore the natural environment and provide opportunities for ecologically sensitive public enjoyment and education. So we have a system of large preserves encompassing roughly 70,000 acres at this point, many of which are open to the public for them to go out and connect with nature. And on the San Mateo County coast, we actually have a separate mission that's an add-on to our original mission, which includes preservation of agricultural land and preservation of rural character, as well as encouragement of viable agricultural use, because that is a very important component of the San Mateo County coast community. So I want to give you some background on our resource management policies, which dictate how we operate in reference to wildlife management. So we have wildlife management policies in particular that pertain to mountain lions and many other species of wildlife that we have on MidPenn properties. So the main goal overarching for this policy is to maintain and promote healthy and diverse native wildlife populations. So of course, mountain lions are a native species in our region, and they fall under this category. But we also want to understand and maintain the diversity of native wildlife, protect, maintain, and enhance habitat features that have value to wildlife, protect animal populations against impacts from human actions, and protect and enhance habitats and populations of special status animal species. Mountain lions are a specially protected mammal, and as mentioned earlier, they're also currently a candidate species for threatened under the California Endangered Species Act. In addition, we also have grazing management policy that pertains specifically to the interactions of wildlife, in particular mountain lions and coyotes, any predator really, that may on occasion take livestock that we utilize alongside our conservation grazing partners, which are regional local partners that many of whom have grazed in these areas on the San Mateo County coast for generations. And they help us to maintain grassland habitat and manage fuel loads, and then again, maintain that agricultural heritage of the area on the San Mateo County coast. MidPenn's a little bit unique in that we actually have a policy specific to the interactions of wildlife and livestock and the issue of predation. And this policy was passed in early 2020. Typically, what we see in the photos below are what we find out on our MidPenn lands, where cattle and wildlife are able to avoid each other pretty well. This mountain lion's out at night crossing the same trail that the cow was crossing, in the day, a little bit later, a few days later. But that's not always the case. So this policy reflects that. There we go. So again, a unique thing for MidPenn when you compare us to other similar agencies in the Bay Area is this updated policy allows us to offer full compensation to our conservation grazing tenants in the event that a predator takes some of their livestock. So if these folks are leasing land from MidPenn and they contact us and tell us they've had a loss, we then contact Cal Fish and Wildlife or UCANR to have somebody go out and independently verify that that individual animal was taken by a predator. And if that's the case, we actually are able to pay them the full amount that that animal would have been worth at the time that they had brought them out to sale. So we basically take an average of that herd sold for the year, and we pay them that amount for that lost animal to try and make them whole. Another unique thing for Mid-Penn is that we've reduced the amount of rent that our conservation grazing partners pay to lease the land. We actually have one of the lowest rates in the region. And this is a reflection of the fact that on public lands, there are certain restrictions about what these folks can do. And we also know that sometimes losses occur and you never find the animal that was taken. And that's just a part of working in a rugged mountainous landscape like you find in the Santa Cruz Mountains. And lastly, and very importantly, this updated policy also includes funding and support for research on wildlife and livestock conflict management strategies. So Carolyn Whitesell from UCANR will get into more details on this, but we went through an extensive literature review process that Veronica Jovovich, who's also on the panel, put together for us, basically looking at all the different options out there for reducing wildlife and livestock conflict. So this chart that you see shows that. Where you see any of those blank squares that don't have any color in them, that's where we have no data really. There's nothing in the scientific literature to tell us whether these tools are effective or not. So this ongoing project that we have that will be discussed at length later is helping to fill in those blanks so we can understand how these different methods function, in particular in relationship to mountain lions and coyotes, which are the majority of the predation events that we see on Mid-Penn lands are from those two species. So Mid-Penn does a lot of work to help conserve mountain lions. Number one, first and foremost, habitat preservation. So we have, again, around 70,000 acres that we have preserved in perpetuity throughout the Santa Cruz Mountains. Habitat connectivity, Philaday mentioned that in their talk, how important that is to have large connected habitat, swaths of habitat. And in particular, helping lions and other wildlife to move through roadways is very, very essential. So we have a project now ongoing that's looking at a wildlife corridor right above Lexington Reservoir across Highway 17 to help lions and, again, other wildlife move freely from the lower portion, southern portions of the Santa Cruz Mountains up into the peninsula. We also do a lot of work on legislation, and we wrote letters of support for the listing evaluation. And then a lot of the work I do revolves around human and mountain lion conflict management. And then, of course, research, which we'll talk about in a moment. We do a lot of education and outreach. This was from a mountain lion awareness campaign that we conducted that finished up in 2018, where we went out to Rancho San Antonio, where we have a lot of mountain lion observations. And we just talk to the public about what to do if they see a mountain lion while they're out recreating in really great pristine mountain lion habitat, which really a majority of the Santa Cruz Mountains are great mountain lion habitat. So if you visited any of our preserves, you've probably seen these signs. They're at every trailhead, and they basically just tell you, hey, what do you do if you see a mountain lion? So for those of you who haven't seen these signs or maybe just need a refresher or don't know, if you see a mountain lion, first and foremost, do not run. Absolutely last thing you want to do is turn around and run. That could elicit a chase response from a mountain lion. So you want to stand your ground. You want to look directly at that mountain lion, back away slowly, make yourself look as big as you possibly can, wave your arms, shout, yell, and basically just tell that lion, you know, you don't want to mess with me. I am not a deer. I'm not a prey item. If you have children with you, keep them close, pick them up. If a lion is approaching you, and not leaving after you're making all this noise and making yourself look big, at that point, we tell people, throw an object at that lion. So, and do so without having to bend over and make yourself look small before you do it, right? So you don't want to bend down and pick up a rock and expose your neck and make yourself not look big. So if you have a water bottle on you, even a pair of keys, whatever, throw that at the lion. And typically that's going to be more than enough to get that lion out of there. More often than not, when people see a mountain lion, it's very quick. The lion sees you on the trail and the lion's going to get away from you as soon as possible. In very, very, very rare circumstances would a lion act aggressive, and in extremely rare circumstances would it actually attack. And if it does, we tell people to fight back. It's not like you've heard maybe people say, play dead around a grizzly bear if it's attacking you. With a mountain lion, you want to fight back, and people have actually been able to drive off a mountain lion attack by just shoving the lion, or even using something like a ballpoint pen. So that's what to do if you are in that situation ever, which is very unlikely. Also, we maintain a webpage all about mountain lions, safety, just ecological roles, information about lions, also information about any closures associated with mountain lion activities. We've done online events. We hosted a Coexisting with Cougars event that had 380 attendees and now has garnered around 2,100 views. And we also change access for trail access when there is lion activity in an area. So what we're looking at here is a map of Rancho San Antonio. This is going to get a lot of focus from my talk today because that's where we have a lot of lion and human interactions. But if we have a situation where a lion is acting unusually and it's being seen on the trail frequently, it may indicate that there's a kill site there. So as was mentioned earlier, they'll stick around a kill site for multiple days, or there might even be young nearby, and there may be a female lion that's protecting young. So in those circumstances, what we do is close segments of the trail so people are kept away from either a den site or a kill site for a number of days until the lion moves on. We can also change the preserve hours, which we did at Rancho San Antonio. Mountain lions are typically most active at dawn and dusk. That's not always the case, though. They can be active at any time, day or night, but those are the times that they're most likely to be out. So if you want to stay safe in mountain lion habitat, I would avoid hiking at dawn and dusk. I would go out in groups rather than solo. And I'd make sure that I'm not doing what I'm doing right now and run around with 2 earbuds in. If you want to listen to music, pop one out so you can still be aware of your surroundings and make sure if there's something around, you can hear it. Other things that we've done is, again, education and outreach. And I'll mention here, everything that we do mid-pen in relation to mountain lions is always in coordination with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. As the regulators that manage wildlife in the state, we can't do anything without their permission or permits from them to do it. So whenever we have a situation like this, we're working directly with them and coordinating very closely. All right, this map is all of the preserves throughout Mid-Penn open space. This is one that our GIS folks put together, and it's really interesting to me. It shows for a 10-year period all of the in-person mountain lion observations. So when somebody calls us up and says, hey, I saw a mountain lion on this trail. And this is for a full 10-year period from 2010 to 2020. And you could see here, like some preserves, Long Ridge, Windy Hill, El Corte de Madera, even La Honda, not really very many observations, fewer than 10 observations for that period. That doesn't mean that nobody saw them, but nobody reported them at least. And then when you look at Rancho San Antonio, we've got 131 observations, so far and away the most. And this brings up some questions for us, like, why would that happen? Is it just that there are more people there? We know it's our most popular preserve. Are there more deer present? And that maybe is bringing mountain lions in. Are there more mountain lions? Or maybe are mountain lions actually acting differently in this preserve because there are so many people there and there's good food available? Are they habituating to human activity? And those are all questions that we're hoping to answer in our ongoing study. We'll talk about in a little bit. So Garrett from Fish and Wildlife will get into more detail on this, but I just want to say, because it kind of feeds into the study that we're doing now, there have only been 23 confirmed attacks on people in the state of California since 1986, and that's the time period that CDFW has kept track of that. So these attacks are really, really exceedingly rare, especially in a big state like ours. But the very interesting topic for us and something that we care a lot about at MidPenn, because 2 of those 23 attacks actually occurred on MidPenn property. So one in 2014 at Pichetti Ranch and one in 2020 at Rancho San Antonio. So first and foremost, we want to make sure that the public that are using our preserve are safe. That's a very important thing for us. But we also want to avoid these kinds of conflicts because they're really bad for mountain lions. If you look at this, there are only a few cases, I believe 3, that ended up being fatal attacks on humans. Most of these, vast majority, are non-fatal attacks. But most of these ended up being resulting in the euthanasia of a mountain lion that was involved in the attack in order to protect human safety and the public. So avoiding these kinds of conflicts helps to reduce the loss of individual mountain lions. So on that note, a lot of what we talked about earlier was looking at how do we change human behavior? How do we influence and educate people to make them act a little bit differently in the presence of mountain lions and in mountain lion habitat? But we are also realizing that there's a lot we don't know about how we might be able to influence mountain lion behavior. So to help address that, we've been working with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife and the UCSC Puma Project through the Wilmers Lab, which is also separate from the Bay Area Puma Project. Again, another one of those agencies organizations that sound similar. But we've been working with the UCSC Puma Project, and we are in the 2nd year now of a 5-year human and mountain lion interaction study that will result in the development of a management plan to help reduce conflicts. So our objectives of this study are to, 1, estimate the local mountain lion population size, compare home ranges within the study area versus other parts of the Santa Cruz Mountains, so areas with a lot of human use versus areas without a lot of human use. And then assess what factors influence human and mountain lion interactions. Is it just about how many people are on the trail? Is it about prey? Is it about the number of lions? Is it about vegetative cover around trails? And then we want to look at whether or not particular deterrents are effective at mitigating these conflicts. So in year 2, we had collared with GPS collars, which track the location and movement of mountain lions, 13 mountain lions. And we had 9 of those 13 in year 2 that are overlapping with district preserves within their home ranges. So all the little colors, polygons that you see here are mountain lion home ranges. And since the study began, we've had 24 mountain lion individuals that have been collared as part of this work. So one way that we're looking at estimating the population size throughout the region is combining the collar data that we have with camera traps that we have. And basically we can say what proportion of animals show up on the cameras with a collar versus without a collar. We can do some statistics and we can get an estimate for the number of individuals. We also want to do that on a more fine scale at places like Rancho San Antonio. So we have an independent camera grid here that will allow us again to compare the number of collared versus uncollared individuals and then be able to tell within that preserve how many mountain lions do we have. We're also looking at how the home ranges vary from site to site. And just to kind of give you an idea, males in our area from the collared lions that we've had collared have a range of about 36 square miles. And females have a range of, and part of this is blocked from my screen, unfortunately, but you probably see it, 47 kilometers and I don't know, 16, 17 square miles.
18.
Oh, so close. Thanks, Heather. So, they have really large home ranges. They move around quite a bit. They can cover vast distances in very short periods of time, and they do move around a lot. And people move around a lot too. So this is something that we're really interested in, is how do people's use of trail networks influence the movement of mountain lions? So one way we're looking at this is we're pulling in data from an app called Strava. which people can use to track activities like hiking, biking, jogging, et cetera. And we can use that to generate a heat map of human use across the entire trail network all throughout the Santa Cruz Mountains. And then we can overlay that data of GPS movement from the GPS collars on mountain lions and see, do they avoid those areas with trails with a lot of human use and use the ones without, or does it vary from one location to another? So that's a really exciting area of research that we're looking into here. Another area of research that we're very interested in that's pretty novel and new is looking at the use of behavioral modification techniques to see if we can change how lions interact with trails in reference to people. So we have this great collar data telling us how lions are moving through the landscape normally. And then what we do is we go out with a group of trained dogs that also have their own little collars on them so that we can track how they're moving and find them. And these dogs are trained to tree mountain lions. So they'll chase the lion, and the lion's natural instinct is to run up a tree and stay there where the dogs can't get to them. Once the lion is treed, we approach and we actually play recordings of human voices. We pull the dogs back so they're not hearing the dogs barking, but are just hearing people talking. And then we mark the lion with a paintball. So we give it kind of a negative experience. And then we repeat that process again during the same day. And then we can see before and after that treatment, are they doing a better job of avoiding trails with a lot of people, or does it matter? Are they doing nothing different at all? So we've been able to do this with 3 mountain lions so far, and are actually starting next week in Sierra Azul to attempt to treat 2 additional mountain lions. And the hope here is that we can have an option that is a non-lethal tool if a mountain lion is acting aggressively or exhibiting unusual behavior. We can use a strategy like this in hopes that we deter an attack before it happens. And then hopefully we keep people safe and we keep that lion from having to be euthanized. So you might see signage like this out in preserves. This is associated with this study. We will close trails and potentially even full preserves if necessary, just to keep people away from the researchers as we do this work, so that people are safe and not getting in the way of the dogs or the lion that's trying to get into a tree. But we're also interested in how landscape management might change the use of habitat by mountain lions. So we're looking at shaded fuel breaks, which is a common management tool to help reduce fire risk. And we're looking at how lions are using areas before the shaded fuel break comes in and after the shaded fuel break is in, and seeing if there's any difference. So if we have a trail, for example, that we know is a hotspot for human and lion interaction, we might consider putting in a similar vegetation management regime, putting in a shaded fuel break, and hopefully that would reduce the amount of potential interactions. Mountain lions typically like to be under a lot of cover. They're ambush predators, so they don't like to be out in the open so much. So next steps, we're going to continue to collar and monitor mountain lions throughout the region. We're going to integrate those measures of recreational activity into our movement models. And then we're going to continue those behavioral modification treatments until we've treated as many lions as we possibly can, so that we get a really good sample size and can actually say something significant about whether or not this works. And all of this will get rolled up into a management plan that we will then use to dictate how we respond to these types of events in the future. And this can be valuable for us at MidPenn, and really for any land manager that's operating anywhere within the range of mountain lions, which, as we saw earlier, is a very, very large range indeed. So with that, I'll leave my contact information here at the top. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'm happy to talk to you, and always glad to talk about mountain lions. And I will leave it at that.
Thank you, Matt. And thank you, the folks who are trying to keep up with the questions that are being answered. You know, it's like patting your head and rubbing your stomach, trying to follow the presentations and answer the questions at the same time. I accidentally clicked answer live on one question, which was whether or not the presentations will be made available. And yes, the presenters said they would make their presentations available after the presentation. So next up is Carolyn Whitesell of the University of California, and she's going to talk about her work. Thanks, Carolyn.
Thank you, Heather, and thank you to all of you who are taking the time to listen to our presentations today. I'm Carolyn. I'm going to be going over a bit more about mountain lions and my role through UC Cooperative Extension, or University of California's Division of Agriculture and Natural Resources. So first off, what is my role? I'm a human-wildlife interactions advisor, and that means that I cover all things wildlife related throughout the Bay Area. So I'm here to answer questions, mountain lions, but also coyotes, ground squirrels, rodents, you name it. I'm based at UC Elkus Ranch in Half Moon Bay, and my program generally is split into two sections, which is first outreach and second research. And both of these reflect the needs of the community throughout the Bay Area, and particularly San Mateo County. So for my outreach, I promote coexistence with wildlife through a combination of presentations like this one, online materials, and one-on-one consultations. So if you reach out to me, I can go through the pros and cons of different mitigation options in relation to wildlife biology and behavior, cost, logistical requirements, rules and regulations, and other considerations. I do want to note that I'm not going to make a management decision for you. Rather, I'll help you think through what the different options are, and then you can choose which one you would like to go with. So today, for going over a little bit more outreach, I want to address this question briefly, which may be the reason we're all here today. How do we coexist with mountain lions? Now, I can give a multi-hour talk on this topic, but today I'm going to be just briefly running through many of the best available options for whether you have livestock on a small parcel, whether you have pets, or whether you have livestock on a rangeland system. And of course, I'm happy to discuss anything in further detail. Feel free to send me an email after the presentation, and I'll be sharing my email at the end. I also want to point out that there is no single silver bullet that will guarantee that you will never have a loss. I wish one existed, but we do have tools at our disposal that can significantly reduce the chances of a loss. And the conservation community is constantly searching for new and improved methods. And I'll be touching upon some of those that we're doing right here in San Mateo County later on. I also want to acknowledge that many of you may be implementing many of these tools I'll be mentioning, but some of you may not have heard of all of these options before. And I hope this talk serves as a reminder to everyone to reevaluate your current setup and see if there's any potential room for improvement. Now, I always encourage people to be proactive in taking steps to protect their animals. Just because you haven't had a loss in the past doesn't mean it will never happen. And I can't tell you how many people I talk to where they have been managing their animals in the same way on the same property, and they've never had an issue before, but all it takes is one night, and no one wants to have to suffer the loss of an animal. So even if you haven't had any issues before, I really encourage you to think through, are there any steps you can be taking to make sure you never have a loss? And getting to that, I want to mention night penning. So if possible, if you have livestock on a smaller property, place them in a fully enclosed pen with a roof from dusk until dawn. Now, night penning is actually one of the most effective tools at our disposal. And this is because it protects animals when mountain lions are most active. Now, it does require appropriate fencing. And for the roof, it needs to be substantive enough that it can handle a mountain lion's weight if they jump on it. You also need to be cognizant of the spacing of the fencing itself. Now, my office is at UC Elkus Ranch, and they have livestock there. And unfortunately, a few years ago, they did suffer a few losses because of a mountain lion. So they immediately began night penning their animals and locking them in a barn at night. But they didn't realize that there was a small hole in one corner of the barn, and it was just big enough for a mountain lion to reach its paw through and attack an animal within the barn. So this is a good reminder that you need to be or have attention to detail and really make sure there are no spaces that a mountain lion can access. Also, I want to note that night penning is only going to be as effective as the effort you put into it. And again, I've talked to multiple people where they've been night penning consistently, except for one night. Something came up, they forgot, they had to work late, life happens. But unfortunately, that's the one time that a mountain lion did then gain access to their livestock. And I don't want to minimize the work involved in night penning. You have to be there to close the gate and open it in the morning. You may need to be cleaning out the pen, depending upon how big it is. But again, it is a really effective tool. Livestock guardian dogs are another tool. These protect animals during the day and the night. So this is a potential benefit over night penning. However, there are some things to consider. I have a lot of personal experience with LGDs. I do a lot of research projects on them. And one of the biggest issues that people run into is their neighbors. So you can see in this photo, this is a quintessential LGD at work. It's barking. We want LGDs to bark. This is how they're going to be letting local predators know about their presence. But your neighbors may not appreciate if a dog is barking all night because there's a mountain lion in the local vicinity. So keep in mind your property's location and its proximity to neighbors and how your neighbors feel about you having an LGD. And of course, also consider cost, care, and time. Now, what are some tips for keeping pets safe from mountain lions? There's going to be a whole host of them, so please bear with me, but I'm trying to keep short on time. So if you have a cat, absolutely the safest place for them is going to be indoors. This is going to guarantee their safety from mountain lions and coyotes and cars. You can also remove attractants like pet food or trash that can attract prey species. So if you leave out dog food, the mountain lion isn't going to be eating it, but the raccoons that are going to be coming and accessing that pet food, they can be attracting mountain lions. Also keep in mind that mountain lions can easily climb a 12-foot fence. So unfortunately, a really well-intact 6 to 8-foot fence just isn't going to guarantee that a mountain lion won't get into your yard. And so keep that in mind. Avoid walking pets between dusk and dawn as much as possible. I know that's, sometimes you only have a particular time that's available to walk, but as much as you can, try to not do it when mountain lions are most active. And regardless of time of day, it's really best to keep dogs on leash. You can also, if possible, trim vegetation a few feet off the ground so that mountain lions or other wildlife don't have a place to hide, especially near your porch or in your backyard. You can also discourage deer from lingering on your property. Mountain lions, as you well probably know and have heard in other talks, they're going to be preying upon deer, right? So we don't want deer to be hanging out in our backyard and acting as an attractant to mountain lions. So what are some ways you can do this? Well, if you have a vegetable garden, you can use deer fencing, and certainly don't actively feed deer. Now, I put creating visual barrier. A lot more research needs to be done on this, but there has been some research out of Africa done where they found that just having a visual barrier decreased the likelihood that African lions and leopards were willing to jump over because they couldn't see what was on the other side. So it's something to potentially consider when you're thinking about your yard. You can also have motion sensor lights in your yard. And this is twofold, where it can act to spook off the mountain lion when they set off the light, but it can also let you know that there's something in your yard. And I know I personally have motion sensor lights in my yard because I regularly have coyotes come through. And so if a light goes off, I know I'm not going to let my dog out by itself. I'm going to go and inspect the yard first and then stay with my dog because there's some animal in the vicinity. So I'd mentioned that research was a big part of my role. So what am I currently working on? Multiple projects on LGDs. I've been examining carnivore use of rangeland in San Mateo County through the use of camera traps on public and private land. And I'm also working to try to increase the accuracy of reporting of livestock losses in the county. Now, if you suffer a livestock or a pet loss, I highly encourage you to submit a report through the Wildlife Incident Reporting System, or WIR, that is run by California Department of Fish and Wildlife. And our next presenter, Garrett, will be mentioning this as well. However, I acknowledge that some people I've met within the Bay Area aren't comfortable reporting to CDFW, and I don't want that data to be lost because it's really important that we have a full picture of how many livestock and pets are being lost to mountain lions so that we can know what's going on currently and that we can also try to follow those trends through time. And so I encourage you, if you aren't interested in reporting to CDFW, to please contact me directly. And I have my own data set that I've been collecting, and you can remain anonymous. If you don't want the exact property name to be recorded, that's okay too. I can just keep it even at the county level. And if you have a loss and you aren't sure if it was a carnivore or which carnivore was responsible, please contact either CDFW or myself. We can try to come out and look ourselves. And I also, in collaboration with some colleagues, we've created a fact sheet that steps through how to identify what has killed your livestock. So please reach out if you would like a copy of that. And then next, this is really exciting. You may have noticed that when I was going through different tips for keeping animals safe, where was the open rangeland example, right? And that's because we still, as a scientific community, have a lot of questions that we need to answer about the efficacy of protecting livestock, primarily cattle, from carnivores on open rangeland. So I'm really excited to announce that a group of us working together are beginning a project that's going to do just that within San Mateo County. So it's called the Bay Area Carnivore Livestock Interactions Project, or BayCLIP for short, because I know that's a mouthful. And it was originally designed through conversations with local people and groups throughout the county. The objective is going to be testing tools and approaches for protecting livestock from carnivores on rangelands in the Central Coast. This study will be taking part on Mid-Penn properties, mostly within San Mateo County, but some also in Santa Clara and Santa Cruz counties. And the funding is through 2027. It's a really large collaboration led by Panthera, Colorado State, and myself at UC Cooperative Extension. I'm graciously supported by Mid-Penn and the Ayers Wildcat Conservation Trust. And it's really a great example of multiple agencies and organizations working together to try to answer questions that will benefit the people of San Mateo County. As I mentioned, we still don't have much science-backed information on what tools are effective for avoiding mountain lion predation on rangeland. So one of the major components of this project is going to be testing existing livestock protection tools like fox lights and turboflaggery, in addition to testing newly developed prototype tools. And now, if you want to help contribute to this project, a really important role could be letting us know if you come across any fresh roadkill deer or if you find a fresh deer carcass on your property. And this is because we need to be using roadkill deer to set up our experiments. So we're actively trying to source those carcasses. A second research focus of this project is going to be studying predation recidivism, or how often is it a repeat offender that is attacking animals. There are still a lot of unanswered questions about whether specific mountain lions are targeting livestock or pets, or whether depredations are occurring as a result of unfortunate chance encounters. So to do this, we're going to be collecting DNA from attack wounds of livestock and pets. So by swabbing these wounds, we're going to be collecting saliva from the individual animal that was responsible for the attack. And so again, if you have, while it is incredibly rare, and I hope it doesn't happen to you, if you do have an animal that is killed or injured by a carnivore, and you would be willing to have us come out and collect a genetic sample, please contact us, ideally within 24 hours of the attack, so that we can get as high of a quality sample as possible. And I do want to mention, it takes some time to process the genetic samples once they've been collected. So the results can't be used to drive management actions in real time, but they will be helpful for understanding broader patterns and how we can prevent conflict. And it'll allow us to track over time, is it the same individual mountain lion that's doing attacks in various parts of the county? So if you find a deer, roadkill deer, or if you have an animal that is attacked and you would like us to come sample, here's the contact information for the research team. And with that, thank you so much. But I'll go back to this one because it has everyone's contact information. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn. Very helpful. Our next presenter is Garrett Allen from the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. And lots of the questions are being answered in real time. Thank you, everybody on the panel, for keeping up with that. And I think a lot of the questions that have been asked will also be answered in Garrett's presentation.
Great. Thank you, Heather. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. As Heather mentioned earlier, my name is Garrett Allen, and I'm a wildlife biologist for the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, working in our Bay Delta region. Specifically, I cover San Mateo, San Francisco, and all of Marin counties. I'm also joined here this afternoon by one of our local San Mateo County wardens, Gabba Stauffer, and she will be available to help answer any specific questions pertaining to Fish and Game Code sections during the Q&A. All right, really quickly, I wanted to read the department's mission for those who may not know the department much and what it's tasked with. So the mission of the department is to manage California's diverse fish, wildlife, and plant resources and the habitats upon which they depend for their ecological value and for their use and enjoyment by the public. What I can tell you is that the department is tasked with a lot, and there are many programs and functions working in tandem across the state and split up into many different programs, as I mentioned. So if you're ever curious about what exactly the department does, there's a lot of great information on our website. And then with respect to mountain lions, really fundamental to the department's conservation, education, and outreach regarding mountain lions, the department's working to maintain genetically diverse and demographically viable populations. We're really working to minimize conflicts between mountain lions and humans to the greatest extent we can, identifying and protecting important habitats, improving public awareness, and identify research and emerging management and scientific issues. All right, so I want to start by defining some key terms and acronyms that I'll be using before I jump into the bulk of my presentation, just so there's no confusion as to what I'm referring to. So I'm going to use the acronym CISA to refer to the California Endangered Species Act. When I say ESU, I'm talking about an evolutionarily significant unit, which means a population or group of populations that is substantially reproductively isolated from other population units. I'll mainly be discussing this when I'm talking about the current status of mountain lions in California and the recent petition to list them as a threatened or endangered species in the state. When I say take, I'm referring to the Fish and Game Code definition, which means catch, capture, kill, or attempt to catch, capture, or kill. And lastly, when I talk about depredation, I'm referring to a confirmed mountain lion attack on livestock, hoofstock, or a domestic animal. All right, before I dive into the status of mountain lions, I wanted to take the time to talk about the difference between the California Department of Fish and Wildlife and the Fish and Game Commission with respect to their functions. So the Fish and Game Commission and the California Department of Fish and Wildlife are completely separate agencies. The legislature has delegated the Fish and Game Commission a variety of powers, and these powers are delegated within California statutes that comprise the Fish and Game Code. The Commission's regulations are included also within Title 14 of the California Code of Regulations, and they have a wide range of responsibilities, but they're primarily responsibilities of formulation of policies for the conduct of the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. So really, in short, the Commission makes the laws and regs and code in Title 14, which ultimately dictates how the department carries out its responsibilities it is tasked with. All right, so before we dive into the current status of mountain lions, California, I feel it's important we cover how we got here, because the history of mountain lion status and management does provide some insight on how the species population has changed over time, which I'll discuss further in a couple slides. So in 1907, there was a bounty on mountain lions at $20 a head. This bounty period lasted for about 57 years until 1963, when mountain lions became classified as a non-game mammal by the commission, which meant that they could be hunted without restriction and without a hunting license. The only difference being that there was no longer any economic incentive for hunting mountain lions in California. 6 years later, in 1969, mountain lions were classified as a game mammal by the Fish and Game Commission, and hunting regulations were created for the species, and a hunting license was required to take a mountain lion. Fast forward to 1972, the state legislature enacted a moratorium on hunting mountain lions due to growing public concern over the status of the species. That moratorium expired in 1986, and ungulate conservation groups at the time successfully lobbied to redesignate mountain lions as a game species. However, in 1990, California voters passed Prop 117, also known as the California Wildlife Protection Act, and mountain lions became designated as a specially protected species, which generally meant that you couldn't take a mountain lion except if the department deemed a mountain lion to be an imminent threat to public health and safety, or was found to have damaged livestock or other property, in which case the landowner could apply for a depredation permit from CFW to lawfully take a mountain lion. I also want to highlight here that the specially protected species status was unique in that it was a political designation and not based on biological information regarding population abundance or trend. All right, so fast forward to 2019, the Center for Biological Diversity and the Mountain Lion Foundation filed a petition with the Fish and Game Commission to list mountain lions in the Southern California Central Coast Evolutionarily Significant Unit as threatened or endangered under CISA. The ESU is broken down into six subpopulations, which include the Santa Ana Mountains, the Eastern Peninsula Range, the San Gabriel, San Bernardino Mountains, Central Coast South, so that's the Santa Monica Mountains, Central Coast Central, and Central Coast North, which is the Santa Cruz Mountains. The important thing to note, and I know the Felidae touched on this, is that the petition is largely based on low genetic diversity of these populations as a result of habitat loss and fragmentation, and the consequent impacts those have on the species or the population's viability over time. So the petition to list mountain lion subpopulations in the ESU as threatened or endangered, either singularly or collectively, does not have much to do with the species' total abundance. And then in 2020, the mountain lion became a candidate species for listing under CISA, and Fish and Game Commission tasked the department with performing an in-depth status review of the species to determine whether mountain lions within the Southern California Central Coast ESU warrant listing as threatened or endangered under CISA. One important note is that the candidate species are afforded protections as if they're actually listed until the final determination has been made. The department's review is still ongoing, and I'm unaware at this time when the review will be completed. At some point in time, perhaps this year, the department will make its formal recommendation before the Fish and Game Commission at one of its monthly meetings as to whether or not the department believes listing the entire Southern California Central Coast ESU or any of the subpopulations individually as threatened or endangered under CISA is warranted. It's also important to point out that contrary to the mountain lion specially protected species status from Prop 117 being a political designation, the department is reviewing the status of mountain lions strictly based on biological information to make its recommendation. And lastly, I wanted to add that the commission could decide to act or vote contrary to the department's recommendation. On that note, I also want to mention that the public can participate during Fish and Game Commission meetings. If you visit the commission's website, you can find the dates and agendas for upcoming meetings, and you can see what will be discussed. You can also sign up to be notified electronically when the commission posts meeting agendas so that you are notified ahead of time when the commission plans to discuss the status of mountain lions in California. You can attend these meetings either in person or virtually. You can make comments during the public comment period. This is really the public's opportunity to express concerns or share their story. Okay, so one of the questions we're frequently asked is how many mountain lions there are in California, or more specifically for this group, the Santa Cruz Mountains, and how has their population changed over time? Firstly, it's important to acknowledge that estimating population densities of an elusive species like the mountain lion in a state that is as geographically large and diverse as California is a complex task. And only more recently has the department started using more rigorous field-based and data analysis methods to estimate density and abundance of mountain lions in California. I'll touch more on this in the next slide. This slide, I have pasted a graph from Dillinger and Torres 2020. They looked at how changes in mountain lion status over time and thus changes in the species management over time from the bounty period all the way until a species obtained its specially protected status has influenced California's mountain lion populations. They estimated historical population trends by combining purposeful mortality, so bounty and depredation, and incidental mortality, vehicle strikes, statistics with estimates of annual growth and mortality rates derived from the literature. And through this, they found that California's mountain lion population was unable to withstand the high rates of removal under the bounty, causing their numbers to decline significantly from the early 1900s until well into the 1960s, after which the remaining mountain lions came into an overabundant prey base, allowing their numbers to increase rapidly into the 1990s. In the 1960s, the state's deer population reached its peak, which is mountain lions' primary prey. And just to provide some numbers for how many mountain lions were removed during the bounty period, records show that bounty hunters took 224 mountain lions on average each year throughout the state, totaling 12,580 over the 57 years that the bounty was in place. Okay, so now I'll touch on some initial numbers we've gotten from our fecal DNA survey efforts from 2017 to 2021. And I'm going to present this both statewide scale and also locally within the Santa Cruz Mountains. The department conducted fecal DNA surveys of mountain lions statewide and used spatial recapture modeling to estimate population size and evaluate how density varies with habitat conditions across the state. Our initial estimates for statewide abundance are just under 5,000 individual mountain lions, with a potential range between 4,000 on the low end and 5,500 individuals on the higher end. These numbers actually happen to correspond pretty closely with the estimates generated in the Department of Fish and Game at the time's 1984 study, which estimated between 4,000 and 6,000 mountain lions statewide. And those numbers were derived from averaging adult mountain lion densities across various studies and across suitable habitat for mountain lions statewide. So for our recent efforts, mountain lion density statewide, our initial estimates suggest an average density of approximately 1.7 lions per 100 square kilometers. So that's about 39 square miles. For the Santa Cruz Mountains, our initial estimates suggest a density of approximately 2 mountain lions per 100 square miles, so slightly higher than the state average, which isn't too surprising given the high quality habitat that the Santa Cruz Mountains provides. Our initial estimates of total abundance in the Santa Cruz Mountains is about 58 individuals, ranging between 45 on the low end, maybe 71 on the high end. But what do these numbers really mean? As I mentioned earlier, we don't have much in the way of historical abundance and density data to say definitively how these numbers have changed through time. However, as I presented on the last slide, we can confidently say that the bounty period was effective at reducing mountain lion populations, which then allowed deer populations to peak in the 1960s, thus allowing mountain lion populations to rebound quickly. Additionally, going back to what I mentioned about what the petition to list mountain lions is really centered on is this, idea of genetic diversity of the population that's most important for the population's viability through time. And there's research that suggests that the genetic diversity in the Santa Cruz Mountains is low, largely a result of habitat loss and fragmentation over time. Our major highways obviously don't help with this, particularly Highway 29 to the south that separates the Santa Cruz Mountains from the Gabilan Range, or Highway 101 at Coyote Valley, which separates lions from being able to get over to, for example, the Hamilton Range. So just my last point on that was obviously those roadways are major barriers to dispersing lions, which if they were able to successfully cross the highway, lions being able to come in, lions being able to go out, this would help increase, theoretically increase genetic diversity within the population. Now, from the public's perspective, the number of mountain lions in an area may seem important because they tend to equate the number of mountain lions in a particular area to the potential for conflict. So the more mountain lions there are in an area, the more likely there is for potential conflict with them. This is a perfectly reasonable rationale. It's not necessarily what we always see. For example, you could have a scenario where you have, for example, 50 mountain lions in a particular geographic area, and none of them are creating problems for people. For example, they're not depredating livestock or domestic animals. Or on the flip side, you could have just 5 mountain lions in that same geographic area. And if just one of those individuals is predating livestock or domestic animals, that one individual then becomes a much greater concern than the 50 that are all just targeting their natural prey only. Okay, so then the question is, if there's no hunting and no other management done by CFW, what's limiting the mountain lion population? It's a great question. The first big thing, really, one of the limiting factors is vehicle strikes. So it's a bigger factor than many people realize, and I'll provide some local data on the next slide. Lions also kill each other over territorial disputes quite frequently. There's infanticide, whereby typically an adult male will kill the cubs of another female so that he can then mate with that female. Another big one is habitat and prey availability, right? Someone had mentioned something about carrying capacity. Really, habitat and prey availability is what determines the carrying capacity of a species. The loss and degradation of habitat is widely believed to be the #1 factor contributing to species decline across the planet. And that's wildlife species in general, not mountain lions. But mountain lions are obviously included. Prey availability can come in the form of natural prey as well as access to livestock or domestic animals, which is why it's so important that people do everything they can to remove access to such attractants by keeping animals in secure housing structures during the night. Some other factors include disease, the issuance of depredation permits by CFW that allow a landowner or property owner to lethally remove a mountain lion that has caused injury or damage to property. I'm definitely going to go more into that in the following slides. And lastly, poaching. All right, I want to present some local data that my colleague and I have been collecting on the frequency of mountain lions being killed on our local highways in this area to provide perspective for how often this really occurs. This is not an exhaustive list of all vehicle mountain lion collisions, as there is likely several of which we never find out about. For example, a lion could get hit by a vehicle and then die later as a result of injuries. This is just some data that we have from San Mateo, Santa Cruz, and Santa Clara counties from 2014 to present, because that's around the time that my colleague started in her unit in recording such data. So since 2014, at least 65 mountain lions have been killed on roadways in those 3 counties. As I mentioned, the bulk of these incidents are along Highway 280 and Highway 17, not surprisingly. We occasionally get some along Highway 1 and Highway 92, and even smaller roadways. Majority of these incidents involve young adults or subadult mountain lions that are likely dispersing in search of a new territory. One of the biggest issues with Highway 280 in particular is that, even if mountain lions were successful in getting across the highway, they often find themselves surrounded by, dense urban and suburban development rather than expansive open space. So, many lions may then try to cross back over the highway to get back to the Santa Cruz Mountains, only to get struck by a vehicle. Some good news, though, is that there's a lot more attention on building underpasses and key spots on our major roadways to allow mountain lions and other wildlife safe passage underneath our highways, thus opening up more habitat for them. A local example is the recently completed underpass on Laurel Curve on Highway 17. These are very expensive infrastructure projects, though, and this presents a great barrier to getting more of these type of crossings built for the benefit of mountain lions and other wildlife. So anyway, we're going to shift gears and talk about depredation and some of the pertinent laws and regulations in Fish and Game Code. I'll also touch on how the change in the species status in 2020 resulted in changes to the department's process for issuing depredation permits. Per Fish and Game Code, Section 4802, any person or the employee or agent of a person whose livestock or other properties being or has been injured, damaged, or destroyed by a mountain lion may report that fact to the department. Let me skip forward here. So as I alluded to a second ago, the department's process for issuing depredation permits in this particular area of focus, it has changed as a result of the species becoming a candidate species under CISA. So it's now a 3-step process, which I'm going to go into in the next slide. But before I go over this, I just want to acknowledge that landowners and property owners do have legitimate concerns regarding mountain lion depredation. And the department not only understands these concerns, but we're required by law to be responsive to depredation incidents we're informed of. These are opportunities for us to meet with people in the field, discuss potential strategies for reducing future depredation events. It's also important that we have accurate depredation incident data so that If we're asked to provide such data, whether that be to upper management, Fish and Game Commission, etc., we can provide an accurate depiction of how often depredation events actually occur, and also compare that to historical numbers to determine whether it is increasing with greater or lesser frequency. I'll provide info at the end regarding how to report these incidents to CFW, as Carolyn indicated in her presentation. So the current 3-step process for depredation permits is, I understand that there's a lot of people who, have very reasonable concerns about it. It might seem unfair. I sympathize. This is, though, what we're having to deal with for right now. I don't know if it's going to stick around. If it's going to change, it probably will be very dependent on how the species status comes about. But anyway, so if a person's property or livestock is injured, damaged, or destroyed by a mountain lion, so first depredation event, and they notify the department of that incident, and the department comes, does a site visit, confirms that a mountain lion is responsible, that property owner may then request a depredation permit from the department, and the department would issue a less than lethal hazing permit, which is valid for 10 days and stipulates which hazing measures the property owner can utilize. For example, deploying temporary deterrent systems such as loud music, motion activated alarms, or the use of livestock protection dogs. Such permits also stipulate specific measures that the property owner will implement to reduce potential for attracting mountain lions in the future, such as removing the carcass parts of depredated animals, installing, repairing, replacing fencing, or other shelter designed to exclude mountain lions from the attractant. Now, if a mountain lion depredation is reported at the same physical location a second time, so reported on animals owned by the reporting party within the same geographic ownership or area within a time period strongly suggesting a lion's affinity for the site, the department will confirm the reported mountain lion depredation, and if second depredation permit is requested by the property owner, and the property owner has demonstrated that all reasonable preventative measures listed in the first permit were implemented, the department would then issue a second less than lethal hazing permit specifying additional measures not included in the first one. For example, the use of beanbag rounds or rubber bullets to haze any mountain lions away. And again, it would stipulate the preventative measures that permittee would need to implement to prevent future damage. In this case, usually includes permanent structure to house your animals during the night. And lastly, I've never heard of one getting to the third depredation event in our region, but if it did happen and we came out and confirmed it, at that point, we could be in a position to issue a permit to allow the lethal removal of a mountain lion. But like I said, I don't believe we've ever gotten all the way through 3 steps since this came into effect. Another important section in code to be aware of is section 4807, which states that any mountain lion that is encountered while in the act of pursuing, inflicting injury to, or killing livestock or domestic animals may be taken immediately. If a mountain lion is taken in this manner, it shall be reported to CFW within 72 hours, and CFW shall investigate the depredation, collect the carcass. Under this code section, I encourage you to reach out to our local law enforcement, so either our local lieutenant or local wardens in the area for further questions. Have depredation incidents increased over time? Presented some data here the department has on its website, publicly available. If you search for annual mountain lion depredation permits issued by CFW, you'll find summaries broken down by county across California for years 2001 through 2020. Those summaries also provide the number of mountain lions taken under depredation permits, but in this slide, I created a quick graph to show the change in the number of depredation permits issued by the department statewide from 2001 to 2020. Now, I must mention that this isn't a perfect indicator of how many depredation incidents occur each year, because there are depredation incidents each year that go unreported. I'm guessing probably quite a few, especially people who aren't talking to the department for better or for worse. And some depredation incidents do get reported, but the reporting party does not request a depredation permit from the department. But I put this up here just to show that there's quite a bit of variability year to year in the number of depredation permits issued statewide. But overall, trend is pretty consistent through time, maybe showing a slight increase. This data also includes the issuance of less than lethal depredation permits, particularly for years 2017 through 2020. And I also want to note that substantially fewer mountain lions are taken under depredation permits compared to the number issued each year. Okay, now we're going to move into some department policies, particularly as it pertains to mountain lions that are found in an unusual location or are displaying unusual behaviors toward humans, making them a potential conflict for humans. And we'll also touch on when a mountain lion is deemed an imminent threat to public safety and briefly discuss the department's response to such incidents. You can also find the entire detailed department bulletin 2013-02 on our website. So go over a couple important definitions from that bulletin, and then go into how a department generally responds to such scenarios. What we deem a no harm, no foul lion is one that is found in an unusual location, but is otherwise displaying normal behavior and thus does not pose a threat to public health or safety. I'll talk more about what the department does with these lions when I discuss the topic of relocation. Potential human conflict means a mountain lion found in an unusual location or is demonstrating unusual behavior that could reasonably be perceived as having potential to cause severe injury or death to humans. It is rare that we have these situations come up where a mountain lion falls into this category, but I'll present some information later to explain what CDW does. I'm going to fly through this since we're going to be sharing this. Let me just get to the next slide here. Since MidPen covered verified mountain lion human attacks, I'm going to just breeze through this one as well, because I know we're limited for time, but just some snapshots here. 23 verified mountain lion attacks in California, only 3 of which have been fatal. Luckily, no fatal attacks on children. 12 of the 23 have been on children, and there's been 8 attacks on humans since 2019, 7 of which have been on children under the age of 10. We think largely these attacks are the result of mistaken identity. It's typically when children in open space areas are recreating with their parents, they get out in front of their parents. Maybe they're running down a trail and to a mountain lion, especially at dawn and dusk, that can potentially look like a prey item. I feel pretty confident in saying that mountain lions do not view humans as a food source. Otherwise, we'd be hearing about these sort of things probably all the time. And then I just want to throw up there that statistically speaking, you're about 1,000 times more likely to be struck by lightning than attacked by a mountain lion. Okay, so what does the department do when it becomes aware of mountain lions that may present a potential conflict with humans or that are imminent threats to public safety? Fish and Game Code section 481 gives the department authority to take any mountain lion that is perceived to be an imminent threat to public health or safety. An imminent threat is defined in a code as a situation where a mountain lion exhibits one or more aggressive behaviors directed towards a person that is not reasonably believed to be due to the presence of responders. An important distinction here is the difference between imminent versus immediate threat. We just got done talking about mountain lions that are an immediate threat to public safety because they inflicted harm to a person, caused a human fatality. When a person is attacked by a mountain lion, the department quickly works to attempt to capture the offending mountain lion and remove it. How does the department determine the individual mountain lion responsible? So a DNA sample is typically swabbed from the wounds on the victim and then sent to our department's wildlife investigations lab. Once the lab sample confirms that a mountain lion was in fact responsible for the attack, the department then works with landowners local to where the attack occurred, and if given permission, attempts to capture a mountain lion in the vicinity of where the attack occurred. And once we have a mountain lion in our possession, we take a DNA sample of that individual, and if the DNA samples match, then we know we have the correct offending mountain lion and remove it promptly. Okay, the long-awaited question that most people seemed very interested in: does the department relocate mountain lions? If so, where and in what circumstances? Firstly, let me just start out by stating that I know there's been a number of rumors going around this community for decades that the department is relocating mountain lions to the greater La Honda area. I can tell you that is not true. And there are no other agencies in the state of California that have permits to be able to do this, to relocate mountain lions. So if there is a group of people or an agency out there doing this practice, they are doing so illegally, though we have not received any evidence suggesting this is the case. Secondly, before I dive into this topic, I want to clearly define what I mean when I say relocation, because the terms relocation and translocation, for instance, are used interchangeably amongst the public and the media and even amongst wildlife professionals. I'll admit that this is something even wildlife professionals need to be more consistent about in terms of how we define these terms. But for the sake of my presentation, when I say relocation, I'm referring to returning an animal back to where it came from, contrary to, say, translocation, which I tend to think about as taking an animal from a further away location, say Southern California, and moving it up to Northern California. By the end of this, I hope people have a clear understanding as to when the department does and does not capture and relocate mountain lions, and also highlight some local data, so just how frequently the department does this. Also, I just want to note that it is illegal for the public or any agency without a permit from the department to trap and relocate mountain lions in California. And as I mentioned earlier, there are no agencies or groups in the state that have a permit allowing them to relocate or translocate mountain lions. Okay, I'll start by defining a couple terms that the department uses internally to categorize mountain lion incidents, and then discuss how the department responds to these. So first one's a no harm, no foul lion. This means that a mountain lion has wandered into an unusual area, like an urban area, and may need assistance getting back to nearby suitable habitat from which it came from. The department's response to these incidents are very much done on a case-by-case basis, but the vast majority of no harm, no foul lions are left alone to return to nearby suitable habitat on their own accord. Sometimes the animal does not make its way back to nearby suitable habitat. So like I mentioned, let me take a step back here. So sometimes the animal, these no harm, no foul lions don't make its way back to nearby suitable habitat, or is in a location where it warrants capture and relocation. When this does occur, we work with land resource agencies and landowners to find a suitable location to move it back to from which the animal logically came from. In other words, mountain lions that come out of Santa Cruz Mountains are returned back to the Santa Cruz Mountains. I'd also like to take this opportunity to highlight a really important partnership that CFW has with the Santa Cruz Puma Project. We often utilize the help of Santa Cruz Puma Project researchers in the field, sometimes with these captures. And we oftentimes even utilize their own resources in the form of GPS collars to be able to track the movements of these type of lions so that we know where they're going after we capture them and move them. So I also want to highlight that capture and relocation is typically used by CFW as a last resort because we often find that it is ineffective. For instance, if we capture a mountain lion in an urban area, say downtown San Mateo, and move them back to Santa Cruz Mountains, that lion's instinct is typically to return right back to where they were captured from, and I'll show an example on the next slide. Additionally, the vast majority of relocated mountain lions die, typically within a matter of months to a year, and I'll also provide local data showing that on the next slide as well. It's also stressful for the animals, and they can sustain capture-related injuries or fatalities. The third type is the non-releasable lion, for instance, due to injury, age, disease, or habituation. I want to touch on the age category because this one's popped up recently. On rare occasions, we get informed of mountain lion cubs being spotted in public places or in people's properties. Typically, this is no cause for concern as mom will stash her cubs for days at a time. The location feels is safe and then goes out and hunts alone and then comes back for them. But sometimes when a cub has been hanging around a particular area for days at a time and looks to be in poor physical health, it is a possible indicator that the cub may be an orphan. In these circumstances, albeit rare and largely because of the new status of mountain lions, the department may attempt to capture the cub and transport them to permitted facilities for care. In the vast majority of the incidents, these cubs are too young to be returned to the wild after receiving care because mountain lions typically spend 18 to 24 months with mom, learning how to hunt effectively during that time. And lastly, I just want to make clear that lions that depredate livestock or domestic animals are not captured and relocated. Okay, so some local capture data that my colleague mostly has been putting together since 2013, around the time she started her position. The numbers I'm going to provide are number of lions the department has captured and relocated since 2013 in the counties of San Francisco, San Mateo, Santa Cruz, and Santa Clara counties. In total, since 2013, we've captured 23 mountain lions, broken down by counties as follows: 3 from SF, 4 from San Mateo, 8 from Santa Cruz, and 7 from Santa Clara County. Of the 23 lions captured, 6 were taken to the Oakland Zoo. Another 2 lions were captured but not moved. They were released on site, and 1 was captured and euthanized due to being in poor physical condition. This means that 14 mountain lions have been captured and released back into nearby suitable habitat over the past 10 years in those 4 counties I mentioned. So we don't do this often. And I also want to highlight that we've only captured 4 in San Mateo County over the last 10 years. And move those individuals. When these lions are captured, they're returned to the Santa Cruz Mountains within the county that they were captured. with the exception of San Francisco County, because there's obviously not great habitat in San Francisco County. And as I'm showing this slide, mountain lions do not typically stay in the spot where we release them. To provide an example of this, the Google Earth image on the right is showing a GPS track data for a male lion that we captured in San Francisco in 2020, which got moved back into habitat in the Santa Cruz Mountains, at which point the lion immediately started moving north back in the direction of where it had been captured and ultimately was killed by a vehicle collision on Highway 1. So back to the numbers listed earlier. Of the 23 lions we captured in these 4 counties, 14 of them were moved back into nearby suitable habitat. Of the 14 moved back into habitat, 57% of them died within 6 months, typically as a result of being hit by cars or killed during territorial disputes with other lions. For the lions we captured, we don't know what happened to them, either collar malfunction or they slipped their collar, and the rest died within the span of about a year. All but one of the lions captured and relocated were estimated to be 2 years old or younger. It's not too surprising given that these are, younger dispersing mountain lions typically looking for newer territories. And their dispersals can sometimes lead them into urban areas. So hopefully these numbers provide a snapshot of the low frequency which the department captures and moves lions back into nearby suitable habitat. And really the big takeaways I want to get across this audience is that no matter where we relocate a mountain lion to, it's not going to stay in that spot. And also we're only taking lions that come out of Santa Cruz Mountains and putting them back in the Santa Cruz Mountains. So the department is not relocating lions from elsewhere in the state in an attempt to add mountain lions to the Santa Cruz Mountains population. Capture and relocation of mountain lions is something the department does. Individuals captured and relocated often go back to where they were captured or die fairly quickly. As Carolyn mentioned in her presentation, you can report mountain lion incidents, sightings via our wildlife incident reporting site. I would say the biggest ones that I really encourage people to do more often is depredation events and any potential public safety concerns. And then this is my contact information. You can reach out to me through email anytime. That's my public line in case you want to call and leave me a voicemail or talk to me on the phone. If you have any questions or concerns, obviously about my presentation. Again, I really apologize for the technical difficulties this afternoon. I appreciate you bearing with me. And I've also thrown up there our local lieutenant's contact information in case you have any questions pertaining to laws and regs and whatnot. And with that, I am all done. Thank you, guys.
Oh, thank you, Garrett. That was a lot of information, and I'm sorry that you were having technical difficulties. You can stop sharing your screen now. Yep. The presentations have been provided a lot of information, so we don't have as much time for additional questions.